What's up, Power Painters? This is Taylor Payton of TayPayArt.com and PowerPainters.org coming to you today with another Power Painters process video. Of course, I hesitate to call them tutorials now because it's not really explicitly giving you step-by-step stuff. It's more of a, hey, I need to release some new content and still show people process type deals. So I call this one turning a mess into a face. Now, for those of you who just want to get better at painting and get into the habit, this is probably a good way to do it. However, if you're not considering your fundamentals, you will do a lot of repainting. And as you can see here, I'm basically just taking an old painting that I had, and I have a bunch of abstract marks around the canvas, and I start to pull shapes from that using values and edges and some of the other fundamentals I talk about on this channel and some of the other videos. So what I usually like to do with stuff like this is use it as a warm-up and just sort of get myself ready to create some brush strokes, to see forms, to get into the mindset of I need to squint at stuff to make it look like something. And I like to sort of take this time to derive more skill in creating this painterly aesthetic I've been cultivating for a while. Which, to be honest, sometimes I'm not 100% sure about. Like as you pursue your craft and move forward in your artistic endeavors, you find that you gravitate towards certain aesthetics and styles, and some of them can be less than desirable in certain situations, even if you cultivate them for a while. And even with this painterly one, I find that I get a lot more commissions and a lot more work when I do more clean styles, and sometimes those aren't as fun, but I suppose you have to reserve certain things for your personal stuff or, your intellectual properties or projects where, people are more willing to work with you on the style. But as a working artist, it can sometimes mean you leverage another one of your hopefully expansive tools. And I think a good way to think of it is sort of like being an artistic octopus or squid, where you have different ways that you work with different tentacles, and some tentacles hold pencils, other ones hold paintbrushes, and sometimes you can paint stuff that's really loose looking and very expressive in the mark making, like I'm trying to do here. And sometimes you can sort of paint stuff that is a lot cleaner and more crisp and has tighter edges and what have you. So in this one, I was thinking of just sort of creating kind of a duke or an older dude, and he's sitting in his study, and there is some sort of purplish mauve light in the background, very soft, very kind of creepy, a little, I wouldn't say horror oriented, but definitely more suspenseful lighting, and which means I would probably be pumping the value contrast. However, I don't actually finish this. This is just a warm up, and I called it Purple Evening because that's basically what it was going to be. But as I just kept sort of noodling and doodling, I realized that if I wanted to finish this piece, it would take me much longer. And oftentimes, when I do a warm up, I get the feeling that the piece I'm working on would take more time than I'm willing to invest in just warming up. And if it's a really good piece and I think it really has potential, then I will save it for later. But on the whole, I'll usually just paint over what I was doing because it's not really about the finished product in this case. It's more about just getting that aesthetic down, warming up my hand, warming up my eyes, and the coordination between those two, and also trying to get a feel for just laying down marks and making sure that they are in alignment with what I'm trying to achieve, which in this case is, a little more narrative than I usually go for. However, I forego that for a more portrait oriented thing. Like I said, this would take a lot longer to finish just because I'd have to find somebody for reference in the chair, and I would need to work out some of the background elements. I suppose if I were to open up this PSD again, I could wrap it up. However, I have so many other things to finish that it's like, I'll just use this one for practice. Oftentimes, I find that just kind of painting yourself into a corner and then restarting and not feeling beholden to any particular piece is positive in a sense, because usually you have, one of two problems. or maybe even a combination of both. But one of the problems is that you oftentimes start a ton of things and never finish them, and or rarely finish them rather, and and it feels like you just never have something polished or a lot of work that feels done, or you spend forever on stuff even when it's not going to be good, even when it's not going to be reflective of your highest ability, but you're so dogged about finishing this thing that it just becomes a dogmatic thing. You know, it's more about just having that completionist mentality. And I feel like I fall somewhere in between. Like there's sometimes I'm really adamant about finishing stuff, even if it's not that great. And other times I just keep on pumping out a bunch of really quick pieces that have not a lot of narrative depth or a ton of reason to look at them for, you know, a, a purpose behind their aesthetic. You know, it's all just about the look as opposed to the message or the symbology or the narrative. It's just about look at me. I can paint. I've created these edges and these values and these colors, and it looks like something, and it's fairly accurate, even though I'm being sparse with my reference because I've developed my visual library. And I think there's a time for kind of flexing your painting muscles, but more often than not, I get this feeling that it's wiser just to plan and conceptualize for a good while before committing to a longer piece of work. And in this case, I like to practice painting faces. It's almost like a virtual sketchbook, if you will. I mean, you can't obviously see the pages, but what you draw in your sketchbook is usually tons of heads or tons of, it's a quantitative thing more than a qualitative thing. So that's what I end up doing for a lot of these warm ups, and sometimes I'll end up with a piece that looks relatively decent at the end of it, and I practice my pipeline, my workflow, and things turn out well in that regard. So we just have sort of an average portrait after repainting it. It's a more simple thing. It's easier to get right than a guy sitting in his study having a purple evening. I guess he could have been, I don't know, sipping on some purple drink or something. It would have been more interesting than just, oh, the kind of old man is, hanging out in his chair and it's sort of purple outside and the light is catching him. Maybe he'd be looking wistful. But it's basically coming back to answering a bunch of questions before you get started, or at a point in the process where it's so early that things are easy to modulate and make more germane with the narrative or the idea you're going with. However, if you have to boil it back down to a technical exercise, then and at the very least you could do that, and that's what I end up doing here. Now, with some of my other pieces, I have more narrative. There's going to be a tutorial coming out very soon. I finished a piece called Conversation with a Dragon, where a guy has just finished catching a bounty, and he's speaking to what could be the entity that dishes out those bounties or something that he encounters just shortly thereafter. And I find that if you have this more open kind of approach when you're going into an image and you're thinking about the questions you need to answer through this piece and what you want to say as a whole and how it's reflective of ideas that you find enthralling, then people tend to resonate with it more and they look at it longer and feel a greater connection to it. Because at the end of the day, even if you can make some really cool stuff for yourself, we want to make sure that we have the tools necessary to create narrative and to have emotional impact. Like, when you're watching your favorite shows or playing games that give you a really specific feeling. And it's because of, in movies, it could be the musical score mixed with the emotions of the actor and the tension of the scene. There's a tension, there's a release. In games, it could be a particular cutscene where things have finally come to a head. There are climactic moments, there are more mundane moments, but the bottom line is we're capturing moments. And in sort of the fine art realm, sometimes it's really easy not to have to capture a specific moment, but just to flex your technical abilities. In this one, I made it a little bit more about the design, like the regalia of his outfit, and how he's not, he's not human, obviously, because he has a pointed ear and sort of grayish purple skin. So it it's still a little bit interesting to look at, but these are by no means connected to a deeper narrative, so to speak. And I think that's what I'm getting at. So even if you want to practice painting yourself out of a corner, once you've painted yourself into it, which is a really good skill to have, it's good to know how to, rock with the punches on that one. It's still really smart to consider having a more potent narrative and a greater structure that you can hang the painting on, as opposed to just, look how well I paint or how technically competent I am at this now, things like that. And I feel that that just comes with, consistent questioning of the uh, the subject matter of what you want to convey or say, and doing a bunch of thumbnails in your sketchbook, maybe even marinating on that stuff for a day or two. Um, it's not as applicable when it comes to concept art for, the outfit or the design, because you'd hopefully be hired to do something in the vein of, you're creating it for one aspect of the world that you're working on. That's your job to nail down the really cool outfits or how the creatures look or something like that, but it's connected to something larger. And without that something larger, then it's harder to answer those questions. If you're trying to extrapolate from something smaller, I find that that can, be a very limited approach. So just keep that in mind while you're working. I've always been one to be fairly excited about the fundamentals, but they only carry you so far. And even as I've grown my abilities, I start to realize that. And I spent some time refining this. I feel fairly pleased with it. Overall, I think it was maybe an hour's worth of work, including the whole starting over bit. But at the end of the day, it still all adds up. You're still increasing your ability. You're still putting your reps and your sets in as far as being a painter or an artist goes. And it's a great way to warm up, because this wasn't the only thing I painted that day. And even though I recorded it like a month-ish ago, not quite a month, maybe 3 weeks, but you get the point. Anyway, I really am getting to the end of the video here, so I'll do a couple wrap up things. I just want to say thank you so much for being a subscriber. I appreciate each and every one of you. I'm going to try and be more interactive on this platform. And I'm always doing so many things as a human being, not just as an artist. Like, there's always auditions to go to in my hometown, not my hometown, but my home state of Minnesota, which is where I reside. There's always, projects I'm working on with friends that are collaborative animation things. And there's always, I'm not just doing art. So sometimes it's difficult to put the attention necessary to really grow Power Painters as a platform. But I have redone the website, I've done some blog posts, and you just keep on, like I said, putting your reps and sets in, and stuff starts to grow. And I've attracted almost 10,000 people to the YouTube channel thus far, and I hope that you'll, stay along for the ride, and I can provide insight and value to you, and you'll start to think about this stuff in your own work, because I want to just sharpen people who watch this. I don't want it to be a waste of time. I don't want to just entertain you, in a sense, even though I will do some of that down the line. I want to also educate you and get you thinking and help you move forward in terms of your stuff. But thanks again for watching, Power Painter. Thanks for making this channel what it is. Feel free to leave me comments and suggestions in the YouTube comment section, and check the description box for awesome stuff that I'm mentioning on the screen now. And I'll see you in future videos, and I hope you have an awesome time painting. Take care.